Hello and welcome to this video on the IELTS Self-study program for speaking. My name is Louisa and I am an IELTS teacher and teacher trainer with the British Council based in Paris. In this video, I will be giving you a whistle-stop tour of the self-study program for speaking. You should have the guide itself beside you. If you haven't yet looked at the Speaking Self-Study Guide, it would be a really good idea to pause the video here and download the guide first. It would be even better if you could print it out and have it beside you as a piece of paper. You will also need a pen and paper, as I'm going to be asking you some questions as we go through this video. This is what we will be looking at together in this video. I will give you an overview of the self-study program for speaking, and then I'll talk about some top tips for improving your speaking for the IELTS test. This is how the self-study program can help you prepare for your IELTS speaking test. There are tasks and links in the program to help you get familiar with the format of the test. Also, to help you understand what the examiner is evaluating about your speaking, to know the type of topics to expect and how to reply to the questions, and of course, to build your vocabulary. The self-study pack for speaking is, like the other self-study packs, divided into 5 days. This does not mean you need to do it over 5 days. You can use the packs flexibly in whichever way suits you best, depending on the time you have available or perhaps the area of the test you think you need some more help with. This is what you will cover on the first day of the program. So you'll increase your knowledge of the test, you'll get some practice of part 1 of the speaking test, you'll have some understanding of how the speaking test is marked, and you'll watch videos to help improve your understanding of pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, and fluency, and which can help you to improve your own performance. Let's see what you already know about the format of the IELTS speaking test. You should have your pen and paper with you now. First, let's read the instructions. Instructions are always very important in IELTS, so listen to the instructions and read the instructions carefully. Our instructions here tell us that for each of the gaps in the sentences below, we can write no more than 3 words and/or numbers. Now look at the gaps in the sentences. Write down your ideas of which words can fit in these gaps for sentences 1 to 5. I will give you 15 seconds for this. If you feel you need longer, do feel you can always pause the video and start it again when you've had enough time. So, which words can fill these gaps to describe the format of the IELTS speaking test? That's 15 seconds. Now let's check the answers. So the speaking test is between 11 and 14 minutes. It assesses your use of spoken English. It's 1-to-1 with a qualified examiner. It's digitally recorded and it's in 3 parts. Don't worry if you didn't get them all correct this time, but do make sure you're familiar with the test format before you do the actual test. Also part of day 1 is this website. You'll find the link in the self-study pack for speaking, and on this site you can find more detail about the IELTS speaking test and extra information which may be useful about what the focus of each task in the test is. These videos are also part of day 1 in the IELTS self-study program. They show in a fun way what the IELTS speaking assessment criteria are about. By applying these to your own speaking, you can identify ways to improve your own performance. Still on day one, you become familiar with part one of the IELTS speaking test. How much do you already know? We know in part one, the examiner will ask you general questions. Check the instructions first. We have 3 sentences here, and for each of the gaps, you must put no more than 2 words. For question 1, you've got to say who or what do you think these general questions will be about? For sentence 2, what sort of questions were they? And for question 3, how long is part 1 of the IELTS speaking test? So now, with your pen and paper, write down which words you think go in these gaps. I'll give you 15 seconds to write down your ideas, and then we'll check together. And now let's check. The questions in part 1 are about you. The examiner asks you general questions about a range of familiar topics, and this part lasts between 4 and 5 minutes. So what sort of topics? We know already that it's familiar topics can come up in IELTS speaking part 1, but let's try and get a little bit more of an idea about which sorts of topics could come up and which sorts of topics would not come up. So look at the 2 lists of topics on the right of the screen. I'll read them out. We've got books, cooking, current affairs, festivals, gardens and gardening, metaphysics, pets and animals, religion, sports, and thermodynamics. Which of these topics do you think will not be part of an IELTS speaking test part 1? Write down with your pen and paper the topics you think will not come up in speaking part 1. I'll give you 15 seconds to do that. Now let's check the answers. No, you won't be asked to talk about current affairs. It takes about 2 years to produce the IELTS test items, so they can't be about current affairs because they wouldn't be current anymore if they were from 2 years ago. Metaphysics and thermodynamics are specialist topics. They're not general familiar topics. And religion will not be asked. It's personal and individual. It's a choice. You'll not be asked about your religion, and you won't be asked about your political views in an IELTS test. So books, yes, cooking, and all sorts of general topics, but nothing too specific and nothing particularly personal and sensitive. So moving on to day 2 of the self-study program for speaking. These are the areas that you'll cover, and you'll be directed to websites to help you build your vocabulary, understand how long your answers should be, and practice answering questions and how you could do them better. Let's talk briefly about what are appropriate answers to the questions in IELTS speaking part 1. If you're asked the question, where are you from? How should you answer the question? I'm going to answer this question in 4 different ways. I'd like you to make a note of which of these answers you think are appropriate part 1 answers to the question, where are you from, in an IELTS speaking part 1. Where are you from? London. Where are you from? I'm from London. Where are you from? I'm originally from London, but I haven't lived there for a while now. I've lived in Paris for the last 12 years. Where are you from? I'm from London. It's the capital of the UK. It has a population of 14.5 million people and good transport links. Have you written down which ones you think are the appropriate answers? Let's check. Where are you from? London. It's just too short. B is too short as well. I'm from London. It is a natural answer, but if you're in an IELTS speaking test, you should be trying to show the examiner how good your English is. So by giving a 1 or 2 word answer, you're not doing that. You should try to answer the question and give a little bit more information up to a sentence or 2. You should also answer naturally. C is an appropriate answer. D, although it's long, it's not really appropriate. It makes you sound a bit like a walking encyclopedia. And normally, we don't start telling people about the population of our town or city when they ask us where we're from. The other problem with answer D is it might make the examiner think this is an answer that you have memorized. And that doesn't work in IELTS because the IELTS speaking test is about you communicating and answering the question which the examiner asks you. Let's look at a bit more of what you come across in the guide in day 2. So you're directed to this link, and here you'll find IELTS Part 1 questions that you can practice, so you can get used to answering these kind of questions and giving a little bit more. Try to answer with 1 or 2 sentences. Moving on to day 3 in the programme, you will be working on Part 2 of the speaking test, working on practicing it, recording yourself, comparing yourself with other people doing the task. So watching a test taker answer part 2, and also practicing using phrasal verbs in informal speech. By recording and comparing your own speaking with the videos, you can improve your speaking on your own. You compare your own recording with the recording of part 2. You notice the differences. You ask yourself, is there something you can improve? Is there something that the person on the video said that was, you thought that was a nice turn of phrase? Perhaps you could write that one down and make it one of yours. So let's look a little bit more together about speaking part 2. So in part 2, you're given a card. It has a particular topic on it. You have 1 minute to prepare, and then you are expected to speak for between 1 and 2 minutes. The examiner then asks you 1 or 2 questions to round off this section. So you can see the answer in the text there. How long do I have to prepare before I start speaking in part 2? It's 1 minute. Now look at the other questions. Get your pen and paper ready and think about these questions in the IELTS speaking part 2. Can you see the clock? These are the kinds of questions that my students often ask me. So I'm going to give you 15 seconds again. And remember, if you think you need longer, feel free to pause the video for longer. I'll just give you 15 seconds now to write down what you think are the answers to these questions, and then we'll check together. Now let's check. In the IELTS speaking test, you can't see the clock and you can't take your watch into the room with you. Don't worry about the timing. The examiner is managing the timing. Just focus on what they're saying, listening to the questions and responding. You do have a pen and a paper, a pencil and a paper. Unfortunately, no, you can't choose the topic. You're given the topic and that is what you have to talk about. But remember, you do have the 1 minute to prepare. You can look at the notes that you've made while you are talking, and you won't lose marks if you look at them while you're talking to keep your talk on track. That's perfectly normal and it's not seen as a bad thing. Part 2 is definitely not a discussion. It is you taking the test, being asked to talk for up to 2 minutes on your own, but you can keep the task card with you while you're speaking. Your notes that you make in the preparation time are not assessed and they're actually destroyed. You can't take them out the test room with you either. And you can write notes in your own language, but really it's better to write your notes in English because that will encourage you to be thinking in English and you'll have the English words there once you start speaking in English. So you can do whatever you like, but we recommend that you make notes in English. So let's look quickly at a typical part 2 question. You need to think about how you would answer this question. So the instructions tell you to read it carefully. They tell you how long you'll be asked to speak for. They tell you how long you have to prepare, and they tell you can take the notes. And your task here is to describe a possession that's important to you, saying what this possession is, how you got it, what you do with it, and say why it's important for you. In your pack for day 3, you have links to test takers, videos of test takers at different levels doing these part 2 tasks. Moving on to day 4, the focus moves to speaking part 3. Here you will be practicing part 3 questions, working on both past and future forms, and watching test takers doing part 3 of the IELTS speaking test. Making sure that you have lots of practice of answering the types of questions that come up will both give you speaking practice if you actually say them out loud, even if there's nobody listening, you know, keep speaking, and also it'll make you feel more comfortable and confident about the test, which will help you to do better. You're quite likely to be asked to compare the past and the present in the part 3 or the present and the future. So you're working on being able to show the examiner that you can accurately use a range of past tense forms. And you're also quite likely to be asked to speculate about the future, perhaps comparing the future to the present. So in part 3, so again, some work on the verb forms, on the grammatical forms, that you can do this well. And remember, when you're watching other test takers doing the part 3, make a note of any unfamiliar expressions that you hear them using. Check them, look them up, and make a note of any nice turns of phrase they use that you'd like to use yourself. So let's look quickly at part 3 of the IELTS speaking test, which comes in day 4 of your self-study program. How much do you already know? Read the statements on the screen and write down if you think they are true or false. Remember, you have the text at the top that tells you in part 3 you'll be asked further questions about the topic in part 2. These will give you the opportunity to discuss more abstract ideas and issues. This part of the test lasts between 4 and 5 minutes. So look at the statements below, write down on your paper if you think they're true or false. I'm not even going to give you 15 seconds for this. I'm going to give you 10, but as always, if you need longer, pause the video yourself and give yourself the time you need. Now let's check. So, in part 3, you might be asked to speculate about the future. Yes. In part 3, you are not talking about yourself. You shouldn't really talk about yourself. It's meant to be general and abstract, and you can't take notes. That's what you can only do that in part 2 when you're preparing to talk for 2 minutes. And yes, you are asked to compare the past and the present. Also in day 4, you'll be directed to the British Council Learn English website where you can use the free exercises. This one is particularly relevant for part 3 because in part 3, you can be asked to compare the past. So this exercise, asked to compare the present and the past, for example. This exercise helps you to accurately use a variety of forms to talk about the past and so demonstrate the range of simple and complex forms needed to score better in the grammatical range and accuracy criteria. And of course, this is only one of a myriad of free exercises on the site to help you with your grammar, your vocabulary, or your skills in English, and the exercises are at different levels. So you can find exercises which are easy and slowly work your way up to the more difficult exercises. Still in day 4, the links in the self-study pack for speaking have you watching test takers doing part 3. When you're doing this, make a note of the questions that are asked. Think about how you would answer those questions. If you remember, the example part 2 that we looked at was about an important possession, and these are examples of possible part 3 questions related to this topic. Think about how you could answer them, then practice and record yourself answering them. Remember, in part 3, you need to talk in general and abstract terms. You should give reasons and examples for your opinions. On day 5 of the self-study pack, you pull it all together. So you practice a full speaking test, evaluate your performance, review the work you've done, and watch a full IELTS test. And hopefully at that point, you'll feel a lot more confident about going into your IELTS speaking test, knowing what is going to happen and what you are expected to do. Before I finish this video, I'm just going to go through some top tips for speaking. These are top tips both for preparing and taking the IELTS speaking test, and perhaps more generally for practicing speaking, because if you want to improve your speaking, the first thing is you have to practice as much as possible. And ideally, you have an English speaking colleague, family member or friend that you can do this with. But don't worry if you don't. You can also practice speaking aloud in English alone in a room, getting your mouth around the words. To help, also listen to lots of spoken English. This can be radio programs or television programs or, you know, current affairs programs, anything you want to watch, but make sure that you're listening to spoken English, podcasts, etc. Moving on to the test itself, remember that in part 1, when you're asked those questions like, where are you from? Try to answer naturally, but give a little bit, add 2 or 3 sentences, don't give one-word answers. Keep recording yourself and doing the speaking tasks, then listening to yourself, watching IELTS speaking videos. Pick out the things that the people you watch do well that you could use in your own speaking. Thank you for watching this short video. I hope it's helped give you an idea of what you will find in the IELTS Speaking Self-Study program and how this can help you prepare for your IELTS test. I'd like to wish you all the best with your preparation and with your test. Thank you and goodbye.